guys are in for a real treat today. This is going to be one of those really raw, unpredictable episodes where I'm sharing something incredibly personal and how it has impacted how I run a business. So you're probably going to get to know more about the behind the scenes woman of the Lashpreneur in a whole new light. And who better to share the truth about what it's like to be a Lashpreneur than the person who has witnessed my journey, ups, downs, and everything in between. That would be this guy, my husband, Chris Walsh.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast, honey, and to the show.
How are you?
We're popping his podcast cherry. So Chris and I are in a really great place right now. I know if you've listened to the past episode I did last year, I did share that we had quote unquote separated because I didn't know a better word to use, but it wasn't what I would think a traditional separation is. And we'll get into what the past year has been like for us. But we just moved into a new house. And so we have a new room where my office is now. And I thought it would be a really great time for Chris to come on and just share kind of what the partner side of being married to an entrepreneur is and what that's been like for him and how that's affected us both positively and maybe not too positively. And then we have some follower Q&As about our relationship and running a business and being parents and trying to do all the things and live that American dream. So you ready to dive in?
Let's go.
All right. So let's talk about, let's start with last year, this time, almost exactly a year ago. You were diagnosed with PTSD.
I was.
Yeah. How was that?
Kind of life-changing.
Yeah, very eye-opening for both of us. So your experience of when we were in therapy, we were going to marriage counseling for a couple months.
Yep.
We had hit rock bottom with our marriage. I'll be completely transparent about that. We were both just very unhappy in the relationship and couldn't quite figure out how to get out of our own way to try and salvage the relationship. To give you context, our son was 3 and our daughter was 9 months at this time last year. So little babies. And his PTSD does stem from when he was in the military, but it had a lot to do with noise. And so the noise level of our children really, I guess for lack of a better word, maybe you can describe it, put you in fight or flight mode.
That's what they call a trigger.
Okay.
So like anything that would kind of recall you back to those moments of that trauma, it's called a trigger. So the louder the kids got, the more the trigger was activated, and it was more than I could handle at times to actually keep everything under control. And that's when I would have like these big outbursts.
Yeah. And
it didn't necessarily have to do with Tara or what was going on. I would just blow up at random times.
Yeah. And it had been years of us kind of battling through this because he had gotten out of the military 4 years ago now. And that was right. Our son was 9 months old at the time. And so it was a lot of things all coming together of him getting back into civilian life, getting out of this structured world that, he thought he was going to do for the rest of his life. And I just was witnessing him not thriving and declining over years. And we've had so many conversations of, what do you want to do? Okay, let's go do that. And I was trying to be as supportive as I could. At one point you worked in the Lashpreneur.
I did.
I was like, fine, quit your job. You can come work with me, not for me, with me. And that actually was kind of the catalyst to you finding something that you love to do and what you're pursuing now. So why don't you talk about working with me?
So Tara was doing the podcast. She was already starting to do all the amazing things that she's doing now. And I was the audio video guy. So I was behind the scenes, cutting up the audio and video for the podcast and getting the stuff ready for YouTube as well. And long days of editing, and constantly hearing the woman that you love at the end of the day when she actually wants to talk to you, you're just like, I need a break.
He'd been listening to me coaching in these episodes all day long. And then the real me, the live me, comes in and we're trying to have a relationship. And so it was terror 24/7 in his ear. And if any of you have a partner, you know how tough and challenging that might be. So ultimately we decided that was not going to be long-term, that he had other things that he wanted to pursue, but he really loved the audio visual side. So that was kind of the start of him getting back into school and something that he was really passionate about and excited about.
Yeah, I was just kind of bouncing between jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, bouncing between different schools, using the GI Bill, like not really having an idea of what path I wanted to take. It's until Tara brought me into the Lashpreneur and doing the audio video stuff, I was like, I had a passion for this a long time ago when I was a teenager, and I enjoy doing it now. So that's what pushed me into the graphics design and getting into audio video and learning how to actually produce good content.
You're welcome. But at this time, the Lashpreneur, so at this time, see, we'd already had Riley. I think Riley was like 4 months old when you started working with me. I gotta get that right. And the business was not doing well. It was not formatted the way that it is well. So it really wasn't bringing in a whole lot of money. And so this put a huge strain on me, knowing that his capacity and PTSD wasn't in the conversation as something that was even we were aware of at the time when he was working with me. So it was a lot of pressure on me because I was now basically more or less the primary caregiver for the kids, because there was every time that they would get loud, he would have to kind of internalize and step away, or he would just start to get really worked up. And then me trying to figure out what he was going to do with his career and trying to bring him into my world to at least, protect him from a job that he hated previously to that. And everything that I was doing was trying to get him what he wanted. And yet I felt like in a lot of ways I was being blamed or just being told I'm not doing enough or that kind of stuff. And so that was really hard. And without PTSD in the picture and me just thinking, this is who he is now, this is not the same man that, prior to kids coming into the picture and prior to when your traumatic event happened, like this was not the person that I thought I was going to have a partner in.
And I think it kind of caught us both off guard because the traumatic event happened like 7 years prior when we didn't have kids. And so that trigger never got pressed until we did have kids. And first-time parents, how much of a stressor that is. And then for my trigger to now being pressed on me, and I'm kind of blowing up out of nowhere and I'm spinning out of control, trying to figure out, why am I like this? We thought it was depression. We thought it was all kinds of things. And I was taking medications and trying different therapists. And it wasn't until a year ago that we actually found
really good therapist.
that PTSD was like the root cause of this. And that's what had been pushing our family apart.
Yeah. So PTSD is oftentimes rage and anger are a part of how they handle their trigger, because it's the easiest emotion to shut down whatever is triggering their trigger, whatever is causing the trigger.
You're trying to defend yourself. It's defense.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fight or flight mode. So without understanding that there's other psychological stuff going on there, it can be taken very personally. Like, he's just mad at me and he just doesn't like me. But, I will say, I didn't realize how much I loved you until I had to fight for this relationship, which is a good thing, I think, looking back. But okay, so a year ago, PTSD comes into play, and we are making a very tough decision to what we're going to do, because we had a smaller 1,400 square foot. I mean, to us, that was small, with 4 people in it. Do we give Chris the full opportunity to really work on the brain, the damage PTSD has done?
Separating the emotion from the actual trigger.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do with PTSD, is separate the emotions that I feel during those triggers from that actual event. So that way, when the kids do get loud, that trigger is not being pressed nearly as hard.
Yeah. And so we ultimately decided, especially with the therapist, that it was the best idea for the kids and I to move in with my parents so that he could go to therapy twice a week, focus on school, and have a safe, quiet space for him to go to if he feels he's getting triggered, so that it doesn't keep having collateral damage, because it was happening. It was getting a little more frequent and a little more intensified at that point. I think even with the PTSD being diagnosed, it's like now we know what causes this, but we don't know how to get around it. And there were a couple really bad moments last year around this time. And when we moved out, I crashed that week. It was one of the worst weeks, I think, for me, because I thought we were done. I thought there's just no way that he's going to get to a place where we're ever going to reunite. My family just fell apart. I'm going to have to split custody with the kids and all that kind of stuff. And it was heartbreaking. Because I know I had been looking into divorce, not because I wanted it, but because I wanted to be prepared for what was ahead if that's the path we were going down. And we weren't trying to, I don't think, separate from the marriage necessarily. It just didn't feel hopeful. I mean, do you feel that way? Like it was a little dicey there for the first couple months?
I had to jump 2 feet in. Like there was like, if I was going to make something happen for my family, like I had to jump all the way in. So for me, like I couldn't think about like an exit strategy or like what's going to happen. Like I had to push forward if I wanted this.
Yeah. And I think we both had different ways of handling. There was a grieving of, I don't know if it was a grieving, but just a fear of not knowing what was ahead. And for me, because I had taken a brunt of a lot of things and I was the one who was drawing a line in the sand going, I'm no longer going to continue to be treated this way. I guess I just doubted how much his therapy could really repair that. And so how the business plays into it at this time last year is that we had launched the Lashpreneur Society in its new format, and it was doing fairly well, better than it had ever done. And Chris, his focus, and we had all agreed that his focus was schooling and therapy. And so it wasn't realistic for me to ask for him to get a job. And so even more was falling on my plate because now we're separate households. We didn't really ever talk about money because that was an added stressor that we didn't really want to dive into. We only thought it was going to be 4 weeks when we first moved out. And my parents, we moved in with them and they were in the middle of moving another 45 minutes away from, they were 20 minutes away from where we lived. And then they were moving an additional basically hour and a half, depending on traffic. And this was all happening while the kids and I are living there, and the kids aren't sleeping and I'm sleep deprived, I'm depressed. And that's when I recorded the episode last year about where I was at and that, it's okay to not be okay, because I didn't have a happy ending and I didn't know what was ahead. And I had lots of thoughts in my head of like, I need to build this business up enough to be able to support my family. And that may mean that I have to support Chris too, even though we're not together. There were thoughts of that I would have some sort of alimony thing because the business started doing really well.
Damn.
I know. Sorry, I don't think you've heard that. But just knowing that, like, tying it back to the business, that the business had to provide the lifestyle that I wanted, whether he was going to be a part of that or not. That, I think I was just taking a good honest look at, you hadn't really been providing financially other than he is getting BAH for going to school. That's a housing allowance. So we did have money coming in that aspect, but that if I wanted the lifestyle that I wanted, I didn't necessarily feel like I could rely on Chris to be able to provide that for me. And so it was empowering in some way, knowing that like, if I want something, that I'm going to do it, that I don't need to rely on a man. It wasn't that. It was just like, he has different visions of what makes him content that are different from mine. And we talk about this with vacations. Like, he loves being at home. He wants to make our home like a really homey place. And I love traveling and, experiences. And so for us, finding like the middle ground of where our money goes, if there's any left over, that I have to work for that and I have to earn that if that's what I want, because it's not necessarily his priority. Okay. So let's talk about, so I relaunched again the membership in February to the public, and it did really, really well. And so I feel like that was the turning point financially for us, where we stopped being in survival mode. Do you agree with that? Where all of a sudden the money aspect of things and the resentment I had towards him for not necessarily providing financially all went away, because I felt empowered that I could actually provide for us and provide a really good life. And that my income was only going to grow from there because I had a plan of how to grow my business and scale it. And coincidentally, within like 2 or 3 weeks of that launch ending was our anniversary, which I feel like is kind of where we hit rock bottom.
Anniversary was pretty rough.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So we went to Austin, and we were considering moving there, and it didn't go well. But and I remember going to therapy that next week, because we started weekly couples therapy right around then. Because before it was just me going in and supporting him, or him just going twice a week. And I, feel like I'd been sitting on my feelings for years and hadn't had a voice in this. And that therapy session to me was the aha moment that we both separately made a choice on our own without feeling pressure from the other person to stay committed to this marriage, no matter what. That, yes, we love each other, but I feel like marriage is more than just loving feelings and being in love with someone. Like it's commitment. And that, for me, over this past year has really demonstrated what a marriage is, because there's been resentment, there's been buildup, but at the end of the day, I hate that phrase, but at the end of the day, at the end of this life, he's the person that I've chosen to partner with, and we have children together, and I want to be a success story for our marriage. I want to, not just because I love the idea of commitment, but I don't know, there's such a fulfilling feeling of having somebody witness your life with you. And if I have a man who's willing to go through the lengths that he has this past year to work on himself and, face the tough stuff, then I'm pretty darn lucky. Cause I don't, the grass always looks greener on the other side, right? Like you watch like The Bachelor and you're like, oh, that would be so amazing if I went and dated 25 guys. But in reality, I have that connection with me, and I have somebody who loves me and who's willing to live alone, which was not fun for him. It was not a pleasant experience for him, and being away from his kids and not being a part of their day-to-day lives and decisions. Like, he made the effort. He drove like an hour and a half in traffic there and like an hour home just to come have dinner with us, because he didn't want to be excluded and we didn't want him to be excluded. So that therapy session where after we hit rock bottom, I was like, okay, that takes the thread of the relationship off the table. I'm not considering leaving. I'm not considering what life would be like without him. Like, we're good. Like, we got a lot of work to do. But I feel like I learned what a marriage was in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like for me, this whole process, like starting to work through the PTSD and watching the Lashpreneur build, like I remember you talking to me saying, I'm just going to shut the whole thing down.
Multiple times have I said that.
And I was like, where the weaknesses are, and you know how to make the changes, and you found different communities to help you build that out. And you made like one of the biggest changes I've ever seen in any business, to go from like wanting to shut it down to like 6 months later having something that could potentially support us financially and only build from there.
Yeah.
Like
get us a house. Like we sold our townhome last month, and we had a lot of equity in it, so that was helpful. But they only took my last year income, not this year when we did the bigger launch, and it still was able to buy us this house that we love. And it's where we're hoping, for the next 18 to 20 years, unless we want to, I don't know, move to better. No, you don't want to move. We haven't even unpacked yet. But yeah, that was a huge moment for me, that what I've built and what I've been working towards, I feel like the house was what I was working hard for. And to be honest with you guys, it was very difficult. I've had to learn a lot of how to pull back, because I've been working on this for years. Like when Reed would go down, Reed is our son, when Reed would go down to sleep at night, I'd be in his room blogging and writing and designing graphics before I brought on team members. How many times have you told me to get off my phone? Like, it has not been like, ooh, smooth sailing. I'm going to start a business and it's going to be hunky dory since then. It's been a struggle. And I've always had to go back to, why did I start this business? And it was to be able to provide for my family something and connect with people in a way that, that being a lash artist, I couldn't do. And so what's it been like for you watching me go from, I think when I was, the last time I was an employee, I was doing like $400 every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you were the main source of income because you were still in the military. And so what's it been watching me go from like starting a business where we really weren't making much? How many times have I zeroed out our account to invest in something in the business, right? And he's always been like, all right, it's an investment, right? Like, you're going to make it back. I'm like, yeah, okay. I did that just recently, like in
Yeah.
January. I was like, oh, by the way, our account hit zero and I'm about to spend like 15 grand.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So what's that been like for you?
It's been pretty scary a lot of the time. Because when I was in the military, we were paid a salary. So we had enough money and we knew how to plan that money out.
Did we?
We didn't do it. We didn't do it well, but we knew exactly how much money was going to be coming each month. And when you were working during that time, making the $400 as a waitress.
Not even as a waitress, as an esthetician at a spa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was,
okay, we have different start points then.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about when I was working at the day spa as an employee.
Oh, yeah.
I was barely making anything.
That was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
They have since shut down.
Yeah.
And everyone who was worth their weight kind of took off in their own little journey. So.
Yeah. So having gone through starting a business, I think what you're getting to is like, it's not consistent income for a while.
No, it's not. Like, she would have launches and that was like, all right, this is the money that we have for the next 3 months.
4 months.
And then we'll do another launch and we'll have that pot of money and that's gotta have to last us.
And it
didn't. My English is good today.
English are good.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, with the Lashpreneur, and even just as a lash business owner, it wasn't consistent.
No.
It wasn't, I think why the lash industry can be very successful is you can get to the point where you're consistent fairly quickly in comparison to most other startup businesses. So for me, after I invested in a business coach, I started having consistent income. And it was about 6 to 8 months after I started that I was really peaking. And granted, the business was doing a little over $8,000 a month. I wasn't taking that home.
No.
But it was enough to keep us afloat, and you still had money coming in from BAH. But I remember like researching how to sell stuff on eBay, just trying to find like extra income. And that's where the idea for the Lashpreneur came in, because I knew I wanted this to be a long-term career, but I knew being a lash artist, I physically wasn't going to be able to do it. There was a couple times I almost had to quit because of injuries, but yeah.
And it wasn't until you got pregnant with Riley that you were like, okay, like
pedal to the metal.
If this is the time to start the Lashpreneur and really push forward on it, this is the time.
How was that phone call for you? Because we were kind of surprised.
I mean, which phone call?
Hey, I'm pregnant.
Yeah. I mean, we had struggled for so long about trying to get pregnant with Reed that having it just happen randomly and
we were trying, but we thought we'd have to go through IVF again. I was planning for like a year later.
Yeah. We had tried for a couple of years for Reed and then did IVF.
Yeah.
And then getting the phone call, like we were trying, but we had tried before too. So I didn't have a whole lot of hope for it.
Yeah. So I think I've talked about this, that I launched the website for the Lashpreneur and started offering one-on-one coaching. And the next day I found out I was pregnant with our daughter. And then I had to shut my business down for 9 weeks because I get really bad morning sickness. And then for like 6 months, I was working 3 jobs, essentially running 2 businesses and being a consultant for a company. And that was fun. And then I just like went MIA to have the baby and be pregnant and all that stuff. 3 weeks after she's born, I'm like, okay, full-time Lashpreneur. So I quit lashing. I retired from lashing. As a maternity leave for my daughter, knowing I was going to go full-time into the Lashpreneur. And then 3 weeks after she was born, I was then getting ready to launch and create the program of Marketing Mastery Club, which is now included inside the Lashpreneur Society. Head on over to the lashpreneur.com/society to sign up for the wait list to get on that training. Just a little plug. So bringing it full circle, now that we have a home, we moved back in together. You moved in with my parents and I and the kids in April.
Boy, that's fun.
Yeah, living in with the in-laws.
Yeah.
It's not fun to live with your parents either. And so we've been in the house, our new home, for a little bit over a week. And tell me what that experience has been like for you, as far as like how far we've come, how the business has grown, just even looking at how we were struggling last year in all aspects and how it's so different this year.
I mean, I love where the business has come to, what it's able to provide for us, and the lifestyle that that we want to have in the future. I feel like it's more secure now than it's ever been.
And stable, yeah.
Yeah. And before, like from when I got out up until now, it's kind of been unstable the entire time. It's like, I'm trying, I'm making this business here. I'm going to start this business over here. I'm starting this online business. I'm going to sell courses and make videos and podcasts.
Did you believe me when I said like I'm going to make this $1 million business with like one of the first launches I did?
It was probably the scariest time through that. But I was like, I got to go to school to figure out what I want to do and provide for my family, and making that housing stipend with BAH was my contribution back in, and the medical disability that I get as well. So I knew that I was bringing in more money than going to work at another job. So my job was school. So I felt like I was doing what I needed to do, and I just had to
hands up,
be like, all right, you got this, and I'll let you just have fun with it. So it was scary, but
you never let me know how scared you were. Like, this is a lot of new. I'm scared because you blindly supported me in a lot of ways. Just like, all right, honey, do it. Go do you.
I mean, you did so much with me in the military. You're just like,
yeah, I did.
All right, well, you're just gone for 2-3 months, or you're gone for a deployment, 6 to 9 months. So.